I watched my wife preach independence and fly to a Vegas conference. I met lawyer, closed joint accounts, and let it blow up our marriage completely. Decisions. Those were her exact words, delivered with the confidence of someone who thought she was making a bold statement about female empowerment. What she actually did was hand me the blueprint for her own downfall. I found out about her little workplace declaration through a colleague of mine who happened to work in the same building. He pulled me aside after a client meeting and said he felt I should know what was being discussed in her department. Apparently, she had made quite the speech during their team lunch about how she makes her own decisions regarding work travel and doesn't need anyone's permission to do anything. When I got home that evening, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. I leaned against the door frame and watched her for a moment before speaking. "So, I heard you gave an inspiring speech about independence today," I said. She turned around, and I could see the slight flush in her cheeks. She knew exactly what I was talking about, but she tried to play it casual. "I was just explaining to my colleagues that I make my own career decisions. It's 2024, not 1954, right?" I walked to the refrigerator to grab a bottle of water, and apparently my opinion on anything work-related is completely irrelevant. That's not what I said. I opened the bottle and took a sip, maintaining eye contact. "Actually, that's exactly what you said, word for word, according to multiple sources." She crossed her arms defensively. "Look, they were asking about the Vegas conference next month, and I told them I'd decide my own travel schedule. What's wrong with that?" "Vegas conference?" I raised an eyebrow. "This is the first I'm hearing about any Vegas conference, because it's my job, not yours. I don't need to run every business decision past you." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Here she was proving my colleague's point in real time. "You're absolutely right. Your career, your choices. I'm just the husband who apparently has no say in anything." She seemed to relax, thinking she had won some kind of victory. "Exactly. I'm glad you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I took another sip of water. "When's this Vegas conference?" "Next weekend, Friday through Sunday." "Sounds like a great opportunity for you to demonstrate just how independent you are." The confidence in her voice was unmistakable as she continued talking about how her female colleagues were so supportive of her stance. They had apparently spent the entire lunch break discussing modern relationships and how important it was for women to maintain their autonomy. What she didn't realize was that she had just given me all the information I needed. 3 days in Vegas, presented as a business conference, announced to her colleagues as proof of her independence. The pieces were already falling into place in my mind. That night, as she excitedly called her sister to discuss her upcoming trip, I sat in my office doing some research. The conference she mentioned was real enough, but it was interesting how she had conveniently left out certain details during our conversation. I pulled up the conference schedule online, professional development sessions, networking events, and plenty of evening entertainment options. Las Vegas wasn't exactly known for its conservative business environment. This was going to be very enlightening. While she continued her phone conversation in the other room, I started making some calls of my own. There were arrangements to be made, preparations to handle. If she wanted to prove her independence so badly, I was going to make sure she got exactly what she was asking for. The next morning, she was practically glowing with excitement about her trip. She had already started laying out clothes and talking about which sessions she wanted to attend. Her enthusiasm was almost infectious. "You know what?" I said over breakfast. "I think you're absolutely right about making your own decisions. In fact, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." She looked surprised but pleased. "Really?" "Absolutely. Independence is important in a marriage. Both people should feel free to make their own choices without interference." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad you see it that way. Some of the women at work said their husbands would never be this understanding." "Well, they obviously don't have husbands who truly respect their autonomy," I replied with a smile. What she interpreted as support was actually something very different. She had drawn the battle lines herself, declared her complete independence from any input or consideration for her husband. Now she was going to learn exactly what that independence looked like in practice. By Thursday evening, everything was set in motion. She was busy packing, chatting excitedly about the conference and the networking opportunities. She had booked her own flight, arranged her own accommodations, and made all her own plans without consulting anyone, just like she wanted. Friday morning arrived with her practically bouncing around the house, double-checking her luggage and printing her boarding pass. She was wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before, something that seemed more appropriate for a night out than a professional conference. "Don't wait up for me," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "The opening reception goes pretty late, and I want to maximize my networking opportunities." "Of course. Make the most of your independence." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "You're being incredibly supportive about this. I know some marriages where this would cause a huge fight. Those couples obviously don't communicate as well as we do," I replied. "Have a great time proving how autonomous you are." After she left for the airport, I made my first move. I called the florist downtown and ordered a beautiful arrangement of white lilies and roses. The card was simple but effective. "Congratulations on your independence. May you get everything you're asking for." I had them delivered to her office with specific instructions to make sure her entire team saw the delivery. Nothing says supportive husband quite like flowers celebrating your wife's declaration of autonomy. My phone rang around noon. It was her calling from the airport. "The flowers are gorgeous," she gushed. "Everyone in the office is talking about how lucky I am to have such an understanding husband. Just wanted to make sure your colleagues know how much I support your career decisions." The card was perfect too, really drives home the point about independence. If only she knew how perfectly it was going to drive home that exact point. While she was flying to Vegas, I was making some important visits. First stop was my lawyer's office. We had some paperwork to review and update, particularly regarding joint accounts and shared assets. Amazing how much legal groundwork can be laid when someone declares they don't need input on major life decisions. My lawyer raised an eyebrow when I explained the situation. She actually said that in front of her colleagues? Multiple witnesses? Made quite the impression, from what I understand. And she's in Vegas now for this conference, as we speak, fully exercising her newfound independence. The legal arrangements took most of the afternoon, but by evening everything was properly documented and filed. Independence works both ways, and I was making sure all the necessary paperwork reflected that reality. My next stop was the bank. It's amazing how cooperative financial institutions can be when you have proper documentation and legitimate concerns about account security. Joint accounts require both parties' signatures to open, but individual accounts have different requirements entirely. The branch manager was professional and efficient. "These changes will take effect immediately," she assured me. "All automatic deposits and transfers will be redirected as requested." Perfect. I want to make sure everything is handled properly. Saturday morning brought a series of social media updates from her Vegas adventure, pictures at the conference registration, photos with new networking contacts, and several shots from what appeared to be a very lively hotel bar scene. The timestamps showed these bar photos were taken well after any legitimate business networking would have concluded. Her phone calls became less frequent as the weekend progressed. When she did call, her voice had that slightly breathless quality of someone who was drinking more than usual and sleeping less than necessary. "Having an amazing time," she told me during our brief Sunday morning conversation. "Learning so much about asserting myself professionally. I'm sure you are really embracing that independent spirit. The other attendees are so inspiring. Everyone here understands the importance of making your own choices without external pressure. Sounds like you found your tribe." What she didn't know was that I had been making some calls of my own to her office, not to interfere with her career, of course, but simply to ensure that certain administrative details were properly updated, emergency contact information, insurance beneficiaries, that sort of thing. Just being thorough about the independence she had declared so publicly. Her immediate supervisor was surprisingly helpful when I explained that there might be some changes to her contact information. "We appreciate you letting us know," he said. "It's important that our records stay current, especially for someone who travels as much as she does. Just want to make sure everything is accurate." She's been very clear about wanting to handle things independently. By Sunday evening, all the pieces were in position. She would be flying back Monday morning, returning to a world where her declarations of independence had been taken quite literally. Her colleagues had supported her empowerment, her husband had celebrated her autonomy, and now she would get to experience exactly what that looked like in practice. I spent Sunday evening cleaning the house and preparing for her return, not because I was expecting a warm reunion, but because I wanted everything to be perfectly organized when she discovered how thoroughly her independence had been implemented. Her final social media post from Vegas was a group photo at the hotel bar, taken well past midnight on Sunday. She was surrounded by other conference attendees, all of them looking like they had been celebrating their professional development quite enthusiastically. The caption read, Last night in Vegas with my new support network ready to take on the world. Perfect. She was about to get that exact opportunity. Monday morning brought an interesting development. She had texted me at 6 a.m. saying her flight was delayed and she wouldn't be home until late afternoon. What made this particularly interesting was that I had already checked the airline's website. No delays reported for any flights from Vegas to our city that morning. While she was apparently dealing with her delayed flight, I received a call from her office. Her supervisor sounded concerned. Is she feeling all right? She was supposed to be in for the 9 o'clock department meeting, but we haven't heard from her. Flight delays from Vegas, I explained helpfully. You know how unpredictable travel can be. Of course. When you talk to her, could you have her call in? We need to reschedule her client presentation for tomorrow. I'll let her know, assuming her phone works when she finally lands. What her supervisor didn't know was that I had been monitoring her social media activity throughout the weekend. The photos told a story that had very little to do with professional development. Saturday night featured several shots from what appeared to be a high-end nightclub, not exactly standard conference networking. Sunday's posts showed her at a poolside bar at noon, then later at what looked like a private party in someone's hotel suite. But the most revealing post had appeared briefly on Sunday night before being quickly deleted. A video of her dancing with someone who definitely wasn't a conference attendee, judging by his expensive watch and casual attitude toward bottle service. She had been tagged in the video by one of her new networking contacts before apparently realizing how that might look. I had screenshot it before it disappeared. Digital evidence has a way of being useful. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got another text from her, still dealing with airline issues. Might not be home until evening. She was really committed to this delay story, even though the airline website showed all flights running on schedule. That's when I made my next strategic move. I called the hotel where the conference had been held. I'm trying to reach my wife, I told the front desk. She attended your business conference this weekend and mentioned she might extend her stay. What's the name on the reservation? After I provided the information, there was a pause. Sir, I show that reservation was checked out yesterday morning, but I do see she's registered under a different room for last night. Different room? Yes, sir. Looks like a suite reservation under a different guest's name. She's listed as an additional occupant. Fascinating. So much for the delayed flight story. I thanked the hotel clerk and hung up. She was still in Vegas, staying in someone else's suite, while telling her husband and her employer that she was stuck at the airport. This level of deception required a response that matched its boldness. My next call was to her office again, this time to HR. I need to update some information regarding my wife's employment records, I told the HR representative. There have been some changes to her emergency contact information and insurance beneficiaries. Of course. What changes need to be made? She's been very clear about wanting complete independence in her professional life, so I think it's appropriate that her emergency contact information reflects that autonomy. The HR representative seemed confused but professional. So you want to be removed as her emergency contact? Exactly. She's made it clear that her colleagues are her primary support network now. I'm sure one of them would be happy to handle any emergency situations. This is a bit unusual, but if that's what she's requested. She's been very vocal about it. Actually made quite an impression on her team about not needing input from family members on work-related matters. After updating all the necessary paperwork with HR, I sat back and considered the broader picture. She was in Vegas lying to everyone about her whereabouts, staying in some other man's hotel suite, while simultaneously expecting her husband to maintain all the traditional responsibilities of marriage. The hypocrisy was almost artistic in its completeness. My phone buzzed with another text around 4 p.m., finally boarding. Should be home by 8. Can't wait to tell you about all the networking I did. Networking. That was certainly one way to describe it. I spent the remainder of the afternoon making final preparations for her homecoming. The house was spotless. All her personal belongings were neatly organized. And I had prepared a small welcome home gesture that would perfectly capture the spirit of her newfound independence. Around 7 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. Is this the husband of the woman who works at Morrison Industries? The voice was male, slightly slurred, coming from what sounded like a noisy bar. Depends on which woman you're asking about. The one who's been telling everyone she makes her own decisions without asking anyone. Real independent type. You've described half the population. You'll need to be more specific. There was laughing in the background. Then the voice continued. She's been real vocal about how her husband doesn't get a say in her career choices. Thought you should know she's been putting that independence to good use out here. I appreciate the call, I said calmly, but I'm sure my wife is just exercising the autonomy she's worked so hard to establish. Your wife, man? She told everyone she was practically single. Said her husband was just someone who paid bills while she lived her own life. The line went dead, but the message was clear. She hadn't just been declaring independence from my input on her career, she had been actively misrepresenting our entire relationship to justify whatever she was doing in Vegas. By 8:30, I was beginning to wonder if she was actually coming home at all. Then I heard her key in the front door, followed by the sound of luggage wheels on the hardwood floor. "I'm home," she called out, her voice artificially bright in that way people use when they're trying to overcompensate for something. Time to see how well her Vegas networking experience had prepared her for the independence she was about to discover. She walked into the living room dragging her suitcase, looking tired, but trying to maintain that artificially cheerful demeanor. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and she had the particular exhaustion that comes from too much alcohol and too little sleep. "Sorry I'm so late," she said, dropping onto the couch. "You wouldn't believe the airline disasters I dealt with today." I was sitting in my chair, completely relaxed, with a folder of documents on the side table next to me. Actually, I would believe it. Airline problems can be really complicated. She seemed relieved that I wasn't questioning her story. Exactly. And the hotel checkout was a nightmare too. They had some mix-up with my room. Room mix-ups are the worst, I agreed, especially when you're staying in someone else's suite. The color drained from her face, but she tried to recover quickly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I called the hotel when you texted about the delays. Wanted to see if I could help sort things out with the airline. Interesting conversation with the front desk." She started to say something, then stopped. The confident woman who had declared her independence was suddenly looking very uncertain. "Look," she began, "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But, before you start explaining, there are a few things you should probably know about how your independence has been working out." I reached for the folder and opened it casually. "First, your emergency contact information at work has been updated since you made it clear that your colleagues are your primary support network. Now I thought it was appropriate to remove myself from that responsibility." Her eyes widened. "You did what?" "I respected your autonomy. Isn't that what you wanted? But you can't just—" "Actually, I can. Turns out that when someone declares they make decisions without input from their spouse, that works both ways." She was starting to look panicked now. "What else did you do?" "Well, I also updated our joint financial arrangements. Since you're so committed to independence, I figured you'd want your own separate accounts to manage your own expenses." "You closed our joint account?" "I redirected my deposits to a personal account. Your direct deposit can go wherever you choose. Complete financial autonomy, just like you wanted." She stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You can't just make these decisions without talking to me." The irony was so perfect I couldn't help but smile. "Funny thing about that, last week you told your entire department that husbands don't get input on important decisions. Now you're upset that I didn't consult you before making changes. That was about work travel, not our entire marriage." "Was it though? Because, according to several sources, you've been pretty vocal about how your husband doesn't get a say in anything, how you make your own choices without external pressure." She was pacing now, hands shaking slightly. "Who told you that? Does it matter? The point is, you got what you asked for. Complete independence. This isn't what I meant. You should have been more specific about what kind of independence you wanted." She collapsed back onto the couch, head in her hands. "Look, Vegas got a little out of hand, but nothing serious happened. It was just networking and having fun." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot of the deleted video. "This kind of networking?" Her face went completely white. "How did you?" "People post things online, then panic and delete them. But the internet remembers everything." She stared at the image for a long moment, then looked up at me with desperate eyes. "It wasn't what it looked like. I was just having fun. I didn't do anything wrong." "Define wrong," I said calmly. "Because from where I'm sitting, you lied to me about your flight, lied to your boss about being delayed, and spent the night in another man's hotel suite while telling strangers that you were practically single." "I never said I was single." "No? Then what exactly did you tell people about our marriage?" She was quiet for a long moment. I could see her trying to figure out how much I actually knew. "I may have implied that we weren't that close anymore." "Huh. So you were testing the waters for your independence." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Help me understand how lying about flight delays and staying in someone else's room fits with professional networking." She started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic from someone who realized their actions had consequences they hadn't anticipated. "You can't just destroy our marriage because I had too much fun on a business trip." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply implementing the independence you declared so publicly. You wanted to make decisions without input from me. Congratulations, you're about to get that exact experience. But I need—" "What do you need? Because last week you made it very clear that you didn't need anything from me regarding your career, your travel, or your decision-making process." She was sobbing now. "I need my husband. I need our life." "That's interesting," I said, standing up and walking toward the kitchen. "Because your networking contacts in Vegas seem to think you were available for a completely different kind of life. Where are you going?" "To make some coffee. It's going to be a long night, and you're going to need to figure out how to handle your independence, starting right now." As I walked away, I could hear her on the phone frantically calling someone, probably one of those supportive colleagues who had encouraged her empowerment speech. She was about to discover exactly how much support that network would provide when things got complicated. Tuesday morning brought the first real test of her newly implemented independence. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when her phone started ringing at 7 a.m. She answered with a groggy voice that suggested she hadn't slept much. "Hello? Oh, hi, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson was her direct supervisor, and from the sound of her voice, this wasn't a routine check-in call. "What? No, I'm fine. What kind of emergency?" I continued making my coffee while listening to her side of the conversation, which was becoming increasingly frantic. "But I told you my flight was delayed yesterday. I couldn't help that." There was a long pause while she listened to whatever Henderson was telling her. "What do you mean the client called you directly? They should have gone through me." Another pause, even longer. "I don't understand." "What paperwork?" I glanced over at her and saw that she had gone completely pale. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. "But you can't just remove me from the account without notice." Now this was getting interesting. I sat down across from her with my coffee and waited to see how this played out. "I need to see those documents," she said desperately. "There has to be some mistake." She hung up and immediately started dialing another number, hands shaking. "Who are you calling?" I asked casually. "Something's wrong with my client accounts. Henderson says there was paperwork filed yesterday changing my status on the Morrison project." "That's odd." "What kind of paperwork?" He wouldn't say. Just that they received official notification that I was no longer the primary contact for emergency situations. I took a sip of my coffee. Emergency situations can be tricky when your contact information isn't current. She stopped dialing and looked at me with growing horror. "What did you do?" "I updated your emergency contact information. Remember, you wanted independence from spousal input, so I made sure your employer knew that." "But that was just about travel decisions." "Was it?" "Because when I spoke to HR, they seemed to think it applied to all emergency contact situations." Her phone started ringing again. This time the caller ID showed the company's main number. "Hello? Yes, this is her." She listened for a moment, then her face went from pale to completely white. "What do you mean there's been an incident? What kind of incident?" I watched as she grabbed a pen and started scribbling notes on a napkin. "The Riverside project? But that's not even my account anymore." She was quiet for a long time, just listening and occasionally making small sounds of distress. "I understand. Yes, I'll be in as soon as possible." She hung up and stared at me across the table. "There was a problem with one of the construction sites yesterday, a serious safety issue. The client tried to reach me as the emergency contact, but when they couldn't get through, and my backup emergency contact said I was no longer his responsibility, the client panicked and assumed I was unavailable indefinitely. They terminated our contract and hired a different firm. A $2 million account gone." I nodded sympathetically. "Emergency contact information is really important in situations like that. This is insane. You destroyed my career because you were mad about Vegas." "I didn't destroy anything. I simply respected your declared independence. You said you didn't need input from me on work-related matters, so I removed myself from work-related responsibilities." She was crying again, this time with a different kind of desperation. "You don't understand. Henderson is furious. He's talking about putting me on probation. And HR wants to meet with me this afternoon about the emergency contact situation. Apparently there are questions about my reliability." Her phone buzzed with a text message. She read it, and her face somehow managed to get even paler. "What now?" I asked. "It's from payroll. They're asking about my direct deposit information, something about account verification." "Oh, that. I redirected your direct deposit to your personal checking account. Thought you'd prefer to manage your own finances independently. I don't have enough in my personal account to cover my car payment." That sounds like something an independent person would need to figure out. She stared at me in disbelief. "You're actually enjoying this." "I'm not enjoying anything. I'm simply implementing the independence you demanded so publicly." Her phone rang again. This time she just stared at it without answering. "Aren't you going to get that?" "It's my mother. She probably heard about the work situation. How would she hear about it?" "Because Henderson called her looking for me yesterday when I wasn't responding to messages. She's listed as my secondary emergency contact." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. "You should probably answer that," I said. "Independent people handle their own family communications." She reluctantly answered. "Hi, Mom." I could hear her mother's voice through the phone, clearly agitated, asking rapid-fire questions about work problems, missed calls, and why her daughter wasn't handling her responsibilities. "Mom, I can explain everything. There was just a miscommunication about contact information." Her mother's voice got louder. I caught fragments about professionalism, responsibility, and not understanding how these problems could happen. "No, Mom, my husband didn't do anything wrong. This is just a work thing." But even as she said it, she was looking at me with a mixture of fear and growing realization. Her declaration of independence had created a domino effect that was impacting every area of her life. When she finally hung up, she sat in silence for several minutes. "This isn't what I wanted," she said quietly. "What did you want?" "I wanted to feel empowered at work. I wanted my colleagues to see me as strong and independent." "Mission accomplished. You're about to be completely independent." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "How do I fix this?" "That," I said, standing up to refill my coffee, "is exactly the kind of decision an independent person makes without input from anyone else." By Thursday, her independence had become wonderfully complete. She was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, bank statements, and job application printouts. The woman who had proclaimed she didn't need anyone's input was discovering exactly what that looked like in practice. Her meeting with HR hadn't gone well. When they asked her to explain the emergency contact situation, she couldn't provide a coherent answer without admitting that her husband had removed himself due to her public declarations of independence. The conversation had quickly shifted from administrative questions to concerns about her judgment and professionalism. "They're transferring me to a different department," she told me without looking up from the paperwork. "Lower pay, no client contact, basically starting over. Sounds like a fresh opportunity to demonstrate your autonomous decision-making skills." She didn't respond to the sarcasm. She was too busy trying to figure out how to cover her expenses with a 30% pay cut. Her phone rang and she answered with the weary voice of someone who had stopped expecting good news. "Hello? Yes, this is her." "What do you mean the lease application was rejected?" "I submitted all the required documentation." "Ah, apartment hunting." She had been looking for her own place since Tuesday, presumably to complete her independence journey. "Credit history?" "But my credit score is fine." She listened for several minutes, taking notes and asking increasingly desperate questions. "I see. No, I understand. Thank you." She hung up and stared at the phone. "Problem?" I asked. "The apartment I wanted required proof of stable employment and income verification. Apparently being on probation at work doesn't count as stable employment. And without the joint account history, I don't have enough financial background to qualify on my own. Independence can be expensive." She finally looked up at me. "You knew this would happen." "I knew that actions have consequences. You declared that you didn't need input from me on major life decisions. This is what that actually looks like. But I never meant." "What you meant doesn't matter anymore. What you said publicly, what you did in Vegas, and what you're dealing with now are all connected. You wanted to be seen as completely autonomous, and now you are." Her phone buzzed with another message. She read it and her shoulders sagged. "My mother wants to know if I'm moving back home since I'm having career difficulties." "Are you?" "I don't know. I don't have anywhere else to go right now." That sounds like exactly the kind of decision an independent woman makes for herself. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at the bills spread across the table. "The women at work," she said quietly. The ones who supported my independence speech when I tried to talk to them about what happened, they said I should have thought through the consequences before making such bold statements. Wise advice. One of them said I was naive to think I could have it both ways. Either I'm independent and handle everything myself, or I'm in a partnership and act like it. Which one are you? She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I thought I could be both. I thought I could feel empowered at work while still having security at home. You can't declare independence from half a marriage and expect the other half to remain unchanged. I know that now. Do you, though? Because knowing it and accepting it are different things. She wiped her eyes and started gathering the paperwork. I need to figure out what I can afford for rent with my new salary. Good luck with that. As she walked toward the stairs with her documents, she paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Vegas. I made poor choices. Yes, you did. And I'm sorry about the things I said at work. I was trying to impress people. Also true. Is there any way we can we work this out? Fix things? I looked at her standing there with her bills and job applications, finally understanding what independence actually cost. That, I said, is exactly the kind of conversation that requires input from both people in a marriage. But, since you're committed to making your own decisions without external pressure, I guess you'll need to figure that out independently too. She stood there for another moment, then went upstairs to continue planning her autonomous future. Her colleagues had been right about one thing. She was certainly getting everything she had asked for.